I have a story to tell that is connected to the Pawleys Island Community Church scandal. Now, the first part of the story might be boring, but as is with a lot of things in life, you have to eat the crust first to get to the good part. Once upon a time in a faraway land called Colorado, there was once a company named Miniscribe, and Miniscribe manufactured computer hard drives. The company started its life back in 1981, or as the young folks call it, the 1900s. It was founded by Terry Johnson. It wasn't long before Miniscribe outgrew its britches, or to be more on topic, it outgrew its capacity. It went public in 1983, and annual sales were at $77 million. That was because of a contract with IBM to manufacture the 10 megabyte hard drives for their newest computer. 10 megabytes, those were the days, huh? But unfortunately for IBM and Miniscribe, the computers didn't fly off the shelves as quickly as IBM first thought, so they cut back on the hard drives needed. Sales at Miniscribe grew the next year to $125 million, but were down to $114 million by the next year. So Terry Johnson skedaddled. He said it didn't have anything to do with IBM, but sure, Terry. The powers that were at the time also laid off 26% of the staff at that time. But even with the setback, a venture capital group purchased 12% of Miniscribe and became its largest shareholder. By 1986, there were offices in Colorado, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and their growth in sales far outranked other tech companies of the time. Things were only heading up for Miniscribe, at least until they weren't, because their growth was a little too good. They had sales of $185 million for 1986, $362 million for 1987, and by 1988, their books showed sales of $603 million. But then it was discovered that those sales were only on paper. Miniscribe had been cooking those books. In January of 1987, Miniscribe's officers had discovered that there was an inventory gap of between $2 million and $4 million. Well, that wouldn't do, would it? But no worries, dear listener, because the manager of investor relations at Miniscribe had a plan. That manager was Warren Perry. The same Warren Perry who is now sitting in the Georgetown County, South Carolina jail for violating his probation. The same Warren Perry who was allowed to volunteer at Pawleys Island Christian Academy. And what was Warren's plan to get Miniscribe out of its scrape? He volunteered to pick the locks and break into the footlockers of the accounting firm that worked for Miniscribe. And once he did that, he found the files and transposed some numbers on the inventory counts. And he was sneaky enough to know that transposed numbers could be attributed to human error rather than human deviousness. But that only plugged the leak for a short time. By July of that year, the inventory discrepancy had grown to $15 million. And it's hard to explain to investors why you have alleged remarkable sales but don't have the inventory to account for those sales. So the CEO at the time, Quentin Thomas Wiles, came up with his own plan, one that didn't involve altering the accountant's files. Instead, he came up with a more rudimentary approach. He purchased 26,000 bricks, as in red building bricks, and packed them up in hard drive boxes. He then had two companies conspire with him. Miniscribe would ship the bricks to the companies as hard drives, and the companies would then reject the shipment. And why did this work? Because in Miniscribe's world, the shipments counted as a sale, even if the shipment was rejected. But when they ran out of bricks, they packed up other computer waste and packaged those as hard drives. However, Quentin's plan eventually failed as well. It turns out Miniscribe wasn't making a profit at all, and had in fact borrowed millions of dollars on credit lines, but couldn't pay it back. The CFO and VP at the time, Patrick Schlebaum, bailed and sold his shares for over $750,000. New management was brought in, and they quickly realized that there was massive fraud happening at Miniscribe. When all was said and done, Miniscribe had a negative net worth of $88 million. Lawsuits began pouring in, and Miniscribe filed for bankruptcy. It took several years of investigating, but in 1993, Quentin Wiles, the man with the plan, was found guilty of making false statements to the government, securities fraud, and wire fraud, and he was sentenced to 36 months in prison. Patrick Schlebaum was found guilty of making false statements to the government and securities fraud, and was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. And who testified against Quentin and Patrick? 3 former top executives of the company, one of those being Warren Perry. He was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. That slimy little weasel was the one who came up with the plan of altering the accountant's files, and he was given immunity. But it wasn't just immunity from having consequences of his misdeeds. It was also immunity from having that crime show up on a background report. So there's a little side story about Warren from way back in the 1900s.